Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, two names that at first glance don't belong in the same sentence. One is the Hollywood actress who transformed herself into a duchess, celebrated for rewriting the rules of the monarchy. The other is the disgraced son of Queen Elizabeth, a man whose reputation is stained with controversies that still cast a shadow over the royal family. They seem worlds apart. And yet, when investigative writer Tom Bower dropped his latest receipts, fragments of their stories began to overlap in ways no one expected. It starts small. Dates, trips, names appearing on guest lists where they shouldn't be. At first, it looks like coincidence, but when you stack those pieces together, a far darker picture emerges. Suddenly, whispers that once sounded like wild rumors start to feel less far-fetched. Were Meghan and Andrew secretly connected long before she ever met Harry? Some even suggest as far back as 2012. The words alone feel dangerous, a line most people would never dare to say out loud. But once you hear them, you can't unhear them. That's the problem. And here's what makes this even more chilling. Meghan herself once told Harry that she didn't know who Andrew was. She acted as though the Queen wasn't the Queen of England, but simply Harry's grandma. A naive comment, almost childlike in its innocence. But the deeper you look into Meghan's past, the harder it becomes to believe she didn't know exactly who Andrew was. That single question, "Who's that standing next to your grandma?" suddenly looks less like a slip of ignorance and more like a calculated performance. Because the truth is this, Meghan's story doesn't unfold in a straight line. It zigzags. It disappears and reappears. There are missing months, vanishing interviews, photos where she's present but never named, events where she's inside the room but erased from the record. And every time you connect the dots, the same shadowy figure looms in the background. Andrew. But how far back does this really go? And was Meghan's path toward royalty truly her own? Or was it quietly paved inside Andrew's circle years before Harry ever appeared? The moment is almost cinematic. Meghan, freshly engaged to Harry, stands beside him inside Buckingham Palace. Cameras are flashing, the Queen herself is present, and history seems to be unfolding in real time. Yet in that glittering room, Meghan leans toward Harry and asks a question so bizarre it stopped even royal aides in their tracks. "Who's that man standing next to your grandma?" The man in question wasn't a distant cousin. He wasn't some obscure aristocrat lost in the endless branches of Windsor lineage. No, it was Prince Andrew, the Queen's actual son, Harry's uncle, a royal who had been splashed across headlines for decades, both for his military service and for the scandals that would eventually consume him. To the public, Meghan's comment seemed innocent, almost sweet, a newcomer's mistake. She wasn't British after all, and maybe she hadn't memorized every royal face. That's how it was spun, a sign that she saw the Queen not as a monarch, but as just Harry's grandma. But the more you retrace Meghan's steps before that moment, the harder it becomes to believe she didn't know exactly who Andrew was. Because her path, long before Harry, had already brushed up against Andrew's world again and again. The question, then, isn't whether she knew, it's why she pretended she didn't. Was this ignorance or performance? When Tom Bower released his latest findings, that innocent little question suddenly looked like the sharpest move in Meghan's playbook. By acting unaware, she painted herself as the outsider, the normal woman who stumbled into a palace and had no idea how royalty worked. But behind that mask, fragments of her past tell a different story. Yacht trips, elite parties, billionaire connections, overlaps that reach right back to Andrew's closest circles. And that raises the chilling possibility. What if Meghan's question inside Buckingham Palace wasn't a mistake at all, but a performance so convincing even Harry believed it? But that wasn't the only performance. Because years earlier, before Meghan was ever a duchess, she was already rehearsing her role. Before Meghan Markle became a duchess, she was simply another actress clawing her way through Hollywood. On the surface, she played the part of the struggling performer. Auditions, small roles, a divorce that barely made the gossip pages. But people who met her back then tell a very different story. A British showbiz journalist recalls meeting Meghan for drinks years before Suits turned her into a recognizable face. His impression? She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she was calculating, quiet, low-key, yet laser-focused on one thing: press coverage. She didn't just want to work, she wanted to be known. She wanted her name in the papers. And more importantly, she wanted a way in. Over that drink, Meghan spoke candidly about her divorce, about dating, even about her interest in football star Ashley Cole. But the moment the journalist mentioned the messy rumors surrounding Ashley, Meghan's expression changed instantly. Her face dropped, Her tone shifted, almost as if she'd been caught trying to play a card she didn't want revealed. That slip showed something crucial. Meghan was strategic even in conversation. She was testing doors, probing for opportunities, seeing which ones might open. And this wasn't about acting talent alone. Meghan understood something that most aspiring actresses didn't. That fame in Britain wasn't just built on auditions, it was built on proximity. The right people, the right tables, the right introductions. She wasn't waiting for Hollywood to discover her. She was actively searching for a backdoor into elite circles. That same journalist would later say Meghan wasn't shy about her ambitions. She openly talked about wanting coverage in the British press, about finding connections that could plant her firmly in the spotlight. Even then, years before Harry, she was playing a long game that stretched far beyond acting gigs. And soon, those doors she tested would swing wide open. Because Meghan wasn't just drifting toward random celebrities, she was about to brush up against billionaires, yachts, and circles tied directly to Prince Andrew himself. This is where Meghan's story takes its first dramatic turn. While most of her peers were scraping together side jobs and hoping for callbacks, Meghan was vanishing for weeks at a time. And when she came back, she carried stories that sounded less like the life of an unknown actress and more like the diary of a jet-set heiress. Her sorority sisters at Northwestern would later whisper about it. Meghan disappearing without explanation, reappearing with tales of Mediterranean yacht trips, lavish weekends in villas, and wealthy companions whose names they couldn't quite place. At the time, her friends brushed it off as exaggeration, the kind of fantasy talk every aspiring actress falls into. But years later, those wild stories began to line up with something darker. Enter Ewan Elash, a billionaire, global traveler, and a man closely tied to none other than Prince Andrew. Insiders whisper that it was Elash who first introduced Andrew to certain luxury trips in Thailand, long before the world learned about Epstein's network of scandals. And it's here that Meghan's timeline begins to blur with Andrew's. Back in 2001, Meghan herself admitted to traveling to Thailand. To most, it seemed like a normal student adventure. But Andrew was confirmed to have been making his own questionable visits to the region around that exact time, often through the same billionaire connections that Meghan was now rumored to be mingling with. And the overlaps don't stop there. Photos and accounts from those years would later place Meghan alongside names like Karina Sholok, Epstein's girlfriend at the time, and others tied directly to Andrew's inner circle. None of it was tabloid front-page news back then, but taken together, the coincidences stack up until they no longer look like coincidences at all. So what was Meghan really doing during those mysterious trips? Was she just an ambitious actress enjoying the ride of her life? Or was she quietly being introduced into Andrew's orbit years before anyone thought possible? Because if the whispers are true, Meghan wasn't simply testing doors anymore. She had just walked into a world where every door led straight back to Andrew. On paper, Meghan Markle's early resume looks neat and respectable. She studied theater, worked odd jobs to pay bills, even landed a short internship at the US Embassy in Argentina. 5 weeks abroad in Buenos Aires sounded polished, something to impress casting directors and later royal biographers. But what came next is far stranger. After Argentina, Meghan quietly enrolled in a 3-month study program in Spain. University records confirm it. The dates line up, and yet Meghan herself has never once mentioned it. Not in interviews, not in blog posts, not in her carefully curated speeches about her education. It's as if those 3 months never happened. No photos, no stories, no memory at all. Why erase it? According to former sorority friends, the Spain semester wasn't about books or classrooms. Instead, they recall Meghan vanishing again, not to dorms or lecture halls, but to yachts in the Mediterranean and villas that no student on a budget could dream of affording. She would reappear weeks later with stories about rubbing shoulders with billionaires, jet-setters, even whispers of royals. At the time, everyone rolled their eyes, assuming she was exaggerating. Who would believe that a barely known actress could be hanging out in those circles? But years later, when names like Ewan Elash, Andrew's billionaire friend, began surfacing in connection to those exact regions and timelines, those wild stories suddenly felt a little too precise. The missing months weren't missing at all. They were filled with trips and connections that Meghan didn't want recorded. So here's the question: why would she hide it? Why not present it as part of her adventurous youth? Because the details don't fit the narrative. The yachts, the money, the men, they don't align with the story of a struggling actress clawing her way up through grit and auditions. They align with something else entirely: access. Access to the same elite world Andrew was already living in, and that hidden overlap makes one thing chillingly clear. Meghan's path wasn't just unconventional, it was being carved out in shadows long before Harry entered the picture. By 2012, Meghan had landed her role on Suits. But let's be honest, she wasn't a household name. At best, she was a supporting actress, a background lawyer who popped up with a few lines per episode. No magazine covers, no blockbuster film deals. And yet somehow, she was suddenly flying business class to Hong Kong as though she were the star of the show. Why? In Hong Kong, Meghan didn't just attend dinners and media mixers. She gave an interview to Diva Universal, a channel known for spotlighting rising talent. And during that interview, she made a casual remark that raised eyebrows. She mentioned that royalty was around, not just vague royalty. She specifically referred to Prince Andrew. Here's where it gets unsettling. That interview has been completely wiped from the internet. No video, no transcript, no trace. It's as if someone didn't want those words ever heard again. But witnesses at the event remember it differently. They recall Meghan moving through the same lounges, the same dinners, even the same after-hours gatherings as Andrew. There were no press photos of them together, no official record. But the whispers have never gone away. And when Tom Bauer retraced the timeline, he confirmed what many suspected. Prince Andrew was indeed in Hong Kong at the exact same time. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's the problem. This was becoming a pattern. Meghan, not yet famous, somehow showing up in elite spaces where she shouldn't belong. And each time, the paper trail is thinned to non-existent. An interview here, erased. A guest list there, incomplete. A photo taken, but Meghan left uncredited. It's almost as if someone wanted her present, but not officially recorded. So ask yourself this: how does a mid-level actress from cable television get into the same rooms as British royalty without anyone noticing? The answer might just lie in the very circles Andrew was known to frequent. And in Hong Kong, Meghan didn't just brush up against those circles. She slipped right into the middle of them. By 2015, Meghan wasn't an A-lister. She wasn't even leading Suits. Yet somehow, she kept showing up in places that most seasoned stars could only dream of entering. Exclusive openings, billionaire-only guest lists, private dinners where deals were whispered, not announced. And once again, Meghan wasn't just there. She was there quietly, almost invisibly. Take Istanbul. The grand opening of Soho House, an event that pulled in royalty Hollywood stars and the international elite. Meghan was photographed alongside Oscar winner Eddie Redmayne and other big names. The Daily Mail ran the picture, but here's the strange part. They listed every single person in that photo except Meghan Markle. She was literally standing in the shot, yet officially she didn't exist. Why erase her? The deeper you dig, the more bizarre it gets. Soho House wasn't just another luxury venue. It was backed by billionaire Ron Burkle, a man whose ties ran deep into Andrew's world. Burkle wasn't just a passive investor. He was the kind of power player who could fly Meghan privately to Jamaica for a wedding, the same wedding Harry attended. And on that guest list, Andrew, Fergie, and Eugenie. Yet once again, no photos, no confirmation. The royals were there, but deliberately kept out of the record. It's the same pattern every time. Meghan is inside the circle but not credited, present but erased, a guest but not acknowledged. Someone was opening the doors for her but also making sure her presence stayed in the shadows. And this wasn't random luck. Meghan wasn't crashing parties. She was being ushered in, shielded, protected. That kind of access doesn't come from a cable show paycheck. It comes from connections, the kind that trace back to Andrew's orbit again and again. So by 2015, Meghan wasn't just a rising actress. She was a ghost moving through elite rooms, visible to a few, invisible to the record. And the more invisible she became, the more powerful her position actually was. If Meghan's presence at elite parties looked suspicious, her appearances on yachts were downright unsettling. A photo emerged years later, Meghan in a crisp white Panama hat, lounging on the deck of a Mediterranean yacht. At first glance, it's just a woman enjoying the sun. But look closer at the company around her, and the picture changes completely. Sitting nearby was Karina Sholok, Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend at the time. Epstein himself was reportedly in the vicinity. And according to whispers that won't go away, Prince Andrew may have joined during part of that same route. It wasn't a paparazzi frenzy. It wasn't a red carpet moment. It was private, quiet, the kind of gathering that only surfaces years later when fragments of evidence are stitched back together. And Meghan? She wasn't the star of the photo. She wasn't even mentioned. Just another face in the background, blending into circles that now raise every red flag imaginable. But it wasn't only the yachts. Meghan also carved a presence in the fashion world, slipping into front rows at Fashion Week, appearing at royal ballet events in New York, and wearing labels tied to Harvey Weinstein's ex. On the surface, it looked like networking, the kind every actress does. But the details tell a different story. She wasn't introduced as a television star. She wasn't credited as an emerging celebrity. She was simply labeled model actress. Vague, undefined, easy to move in and out of spaces without notice. And once again, the same names pop up behind the scenes. Billionaires, insiders, men like Ron Burkle, who not only flew Meghan to Jamaica privately, but also maintained connections to Andrew's own circles. These weren't coincidences. These were carefully managed placements. Each yacht, each gala, each fashion event, Meghan's presence was undeniable, but her visibility was optional, always controlled, always in the shadows. And by the time she walked into Harry's life, the insiders weren't surprised. They'd already seen her in those circles. The only surprise was that the rest of the world hadn't noticed yet. By now, the pattern is impossible to ignore. Meghan's rise wasn't a straight climb from auditions to royalty. It was a series of carefully placed steps, each one inside a world tied directly to Prince Andrew. From the missing months in Spain, to the erased Hong Kong interview, from the invisible photo in Istanbul to the yacht scenes that only came to light years later, Meghan was there, not always in the spotlight, not always named, but always present. And that raises a question most people are too afraid to ask. Was Meghan's journey toward Harry truly her own, or was it shaped inside Andrew's orbit long before? Because think about it. Every time she brushed against Andrew's world, the same thing happened. She wasn't exposed. She wasn't written about. She wasn't even acknowledged. Instead, her presence was shielded, erased, or downplayed. That doesn't happen by accident. Someone was pulling strings, keeping her inside the room, but out of the record. That kind of shielding only comes when powerful people want you protected. So when Meghan leaned toward Harry in Buckingham Palace and whispered, "Who's that man standing next to your grandma?" it might not have been ignorance at all. It might have been her sharpest performance yet. By playing the innocent outsider, she positioned herself as the woman who didn't know the rules, the American who saw the Queen as just grandma. And in doing so, she disguised years of quiet access to circles Harry himself barely understood. Tom Bower's receipts don't tell a neat story, they tell a fragmented one. A trail of absences, coincidences, and whispers that stretch back years. And when you zoom out, the picture becomes clear. Meghan wasn't stumbling into royalty, she was circling it all along. The only real question left is this. If Meghan's past with Andrew's world was hidden so carefully, what else has been erased before the rest of us could ever see it?